أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. All the praise and thanks are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and salutation about Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and all the Anbiya. Today we will be covering Surah Hujaraat, which is the 49th Surah of the Quran. And for those of you that are using the Yusuf Ali translation, it's on page 1403. So let's begin. It's a very short but beautiful surah, primarily dealing with the social rules of Islam, very practical messages that are important in terms of establishing social harmony. We can begin with verse 1. O you who believe, put not yourselves forward before Allah and His Rasul, but fear Allah, for Allah is He who hears and knows all things. This verse actually puts forward an important principle that underlies these social rules, and that is the concept of obedience. And if you look at this statement, it says, put not yourselves forward before Allah and His Rasul. And Allah and His Rasul fundamentally refer to the union of the Quran that we see in front of us today. That was revelation from Allah that was conveyed by the Prophet ﷺ. And the instruction here is not to put ourselves forward in front of this. What does this really mean? It implies that we should be behind the revelation. We should be submissive to it. We should not try and be ahead of it or try and be beyond what it has commanded. So the key message in verse 1 is to be submissive to these commands, and therefore be of those who show taqwa. Then verse 2 to 5 actually now deal with one aspect of social behavior, and that is really about dealing with leadership, and specifically in this case the leadership of the Prophet ﷺ in the environment of Medina. The verse 2 says, O you who believe, raise not your voices above the voice of the Prophet, nor speak aloud to him in talk as you may speak aloud to one another, lest your deeds become vain and you perceive it not. Those that lower their voice in the presence of Allah the Rasul, their hearts has Allah tested for piety, for them is forgiveness and a great reward. What's very striking is that verse 1 is a very critical message, but verse 2 to 5, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spends 4 verses dealing with one aspect, and it's really the aspect is the manner of speech. So although obedience is a critical issue, but just manner of speech is so important. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? And that makes a huge difference. And what you notice in verse 2, it says, O you who believe, raise not your voices above the voice of the Prophet. And what's interesting is it's not saying don't speak in front of the Prophet. It's saying don't raise your voice above that of the Prophet. So it implies some degree of respect to the Prophet ﷺ, and I suppose from an extended meaning, if you have a leader within your organization, group, etc., we should be respectful of that position as such, and not be rude in our manners of communication. The second verse, verse 3, those that lower their voice in the presence of Allah's Rasul, their hearts is Allah tested for piety, for them is forgiveness and a great reward. We see that those, it's sort of like applying obedience, right? Those who lower their voice in the presence, and Allah has tested their heart for piety, for taqwa. So it's real, the evidence of one's taqwa is really what you'll notice in this entire surah. The evidence of taqwa is actually obedience and submission to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now verse 4 and 5 take this issue of the manner of speech to a different level. Verse 4 says, those who shout out to you from without the inner apartments, most of them lack understanding. And you know, what shocks me is that this is like people shouting outside the house of the Prophet ﷺ, basically. And you know, even in today's time, you find people driving past a person's house, they're angry, they scream, they shout, they hoot. And that manner is still sort of a Jahili mentality. And this is what the verses try and educate believers. And what's very striking as well about at the end of this verse, Allah describes such people that behave in such a manner. أَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. They don't have aql. They, basically in simple terms, they're stupid. They're idiots, if you want to put it in that way. And to behave in such a manner with the Prophet is obviously heinous. a problem. Verse 5 says, if only they had patience until you could come out to them, it would be best for them. But Allah is all forgiving, most merciful. And this just finishes off this topic around the speech, is that when we're dealing with leadership, and in this case the example of the Prophet ﷺ, one needs to appreciate that, there's many matters at hand. And one should also show some appreciation and be patient to be addressed, and maybe your issue might not necessarily be on the highest priority. But also it's the second piece that's important is that it's very relevant in today's times. We're a very impatient society. We want to have things instantaneous. We talk of instantaneous gratification. And it makes you think of the verses, there's Yasalunaka verses. They ask you concerning wine and gambling, they ask you about new moons, they ask you about this. And what is interesting, you look at the history of Islam, some of these questions that were asked were not answered immediately. The Prophet waited for revelation to come, and then he would address it. And people might want immediate answers. Sometimes, when we're having a discussion in the halqa, sometimes there's a question, and the answer might not be immediate. And we need to show patience. We shouldn't get upset and uptight, but pray that Allah grants us deeper understanding, inshallah. Right, verse 6 and 7 turn to a different social rule, and that dealing with issues of information, intelligence, and news. So verse 6 says, "O you who believe, if a wicked person comes to you with any news, ascertain the truth lest you harm people unwittingly, and afterwards become full of repentance for what you have done." So basically, what this verse highlights is that news is power, but also beware of fake news. So basically, what Trump complains about is what the Quran teaches us also about. Sometimes he also utters fake news. So we need to have some criterion as a social organization, as Muslims. How do we deal with information and intelligence that comes forward? And the only reliable thing that can be deciphered from verse 6 is not the information, but actually the source of the information. If you look at what verse 6 is telling us, it's not saying if anyone just comes with information. It says if a wicked person comes. In Arabic is in ja'akum fasikun binaba'in. So if a fasik comes to you with information, you need to verify and investigate. And otherwise, you'd basically just be reacting to fake news, and you could actually lead to more harm than good as such. So what is a fasik as such? I was looking at different references of where the occurrence is in the Quran. The common one is usually stories of the prophets. These are fasiks, they transgressors. Those that transgress beyond bounds are fasikun. But fasik also refers to people that are not true to their covenant, and that's in Surah 7 verse 102. Allah refers to the fasiks in Surah 59 verse 19 as those who forgot Allah. Often in Surah 9 we see that the hypocrites who are lying are referred to as fasiks there. And even in the story of the false accusation of Aisha, it was Allah says a fasik. So the bottom meaning, what I gather out of it is a fasik is basically an untrustworthy person, a person who may have some degree of dishonesty. And it makes sense. Obviously, and if you look at it with our social media today, when you get a message, from some people you see this message and you just laugh it off because this is just fake news. So you sort of have a general sense of this can't be true. But if it comes from a verifiable source, then you'll deal with it very differently. So that's the first principle around how we deal with information. And I think it's also a word of caution, because there's so much of information about Sunni, Shia, about Muslim, non-Muslim, antagonism. It's very easy to pass on information, but it's very important to investigate the source and verify the information before we pass it on, lest we cause more harm than good. Verse 7, this gives us the contrast. And know that among you is Allah's Rasul, were he in many matters to follow your wishes, you would certainly fall into misfortune. But Allah has endeared the faith to you and has made it beautiful in your hearts. And He has made hateful to you unbelief, wickedness, and rebellion. Such indeed are those who walk in righteousness. So the contrast is given of believers. And Allah describes as believers as those who have faith And that faith is وَحَبَّبَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْإِيمَانَ وَزَيَّنَهُ فِي قُلُوبِكُم. And that iman is beautiful in their hearts. And that beauty comes from the opposite of the words that I mentioned after. And he has made hateful to you, and the Arabic words there are kufr, wal fusuq, wal isyan. And these are three terms that are sort of incompatible with belief or commitment. Kufr, I think we understand, is disbelief. Fusuq, we spoke about it now, is dishonesty. And isyan is disobedience. We find that also mentioned in Surah 58, Ma'asiyati Rasul, they disobeyed the messenger. So the characteristics that are defining people that these verses will impact on are those who are who don't disbelieve, who are not dishonest, and who are not disobedient. And these are things that sort of make you take you away from that beauty of the iman in the heart. And if you read all these rules, unless we have belief in them, unless we are honest, and unless we are obedient to them, we won't be able to change society and communities as such. So that now completes that aspect around dealing with information and intelligence. And what's interesting, if you are those who handle information correctly, you are not dishonest, you are not disobedient. Allah at the end said, "Ulaika humur rashidun." So you are rashid when you are honest, when you are obedient, when you are committed. And this defines a rashid. Right, so verse 9 and 10 now deal with a different social aspect and issues around disagreements, but actually more directly fighting. So verse 9 says, if two parties, in ta'ifatani min al-mu'minina, so if two parties among you, iktatalu, are fighting, make you peace between them. But if one of them transgresses beyond bounds against the other, then fight you all against the one that transgresses until it complies with the command of Allah. But if it complies, then make peace between them with justice and be fair, for Allah loves those who are fair and just. What we see here is, it's not just like as if Allah has put quarrel, but iqtatalu is like more serious, like aggression, fighting, and it's almost like, where you find feuds. Now let's say if there are feuds among believers, then the commandment is to make peace. What you'll notice is that even in verse 10, the believers are but a single brotherhood, so make peace and reconciliation between your two contending brothers, and fear Allah that you may receive mercy. What's important to appreciate here is that in none of these verses is the word aslama used. It's aslaha. And aslama is generally peace, but aslaha is to repair, to fix. And you'll notice at the end of verse 9 it says, فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا بِالْعَدْلِ وَأَقْسِطُوا. So we find that the measure of resolution is really around aslaha, about restoring and creating equity. And what's very striking in the beginning part of the verse, it says, but if one of them, so you're trying to make aslaha, but if one of them transgresses beyond bounds against the other, then fight you all against the one that transgresses until it complies with the command of Allah. So what is the command of Allah? Right? And how do you choose sides? And my understanding of this choosing sides is two principles. The first one relates in verse 10, that they're not willing to accept that the believers are a single brotherhood. So you're transgressing from that basic principle that you are one brotherhood. And the second one is, because this verse relates to iqtatalu. The verse in Surah 4 is very clear, never should a believer kill another believer. So if they're not willing to accept those two principles, that there needs to be unity, and the second thing is they should not be taking of a Muslim life or a believer's life, then if that party still continues to fight, then you should all gang up and almost show that person to settle down. And if you think of it, these verses are almost like when you think of young children when you're disciplining and the two kids are fighting. The first thing is you shout them and you put them in a corner. You say, stop fighting. And basically what this verse, my understanding, is to say, stop fighting. Right? And that's where you start off. And then you say aslaha. Let's fix the problem. What is the issue? What is the debate? What's the problems? Let's fix the matter. وَأَقْسِطُوا, and let's create some equitability. It might not be absolute justice, but there'll be equitability that's created. And then you can restore back to the believers a single brotherhood. And that's my understanding of dealing with. And this is not, I think we should also not minimize this verse to basic disputes. So like as Muslims, as humans, we all have differences of opinion. That's not iqtatalu. We'll have different, you respect a person's view, it's fine. But if you start fighting and killing, and which we see commonly today, then you actually need to take an aggressive stance to stop the fighting, and then address, then you create some restoration of behavior and create equity after that. And that's my understanding of verse 9 and 10. Now we come on to section 2. Now dealing with a different set of social laws now. And it's amazing, this halqa is like filled with, you need to actually take 2 verses at a time and just apply them, right? So verse 11 and 12, it says, "O you believe, let not some men among you laugh at others, it may be that the latter are better than the former. Nor let some women laugh at others, it may be that the latter are better than the former. Nor defame, nor be sarcastic to each other, nor call each other by offensive nicknames. Ill-seeming is a name connoting wickedness to be used of one after he has believed, and those who do not desist are indeed doing wrong." So if you look at this verse, it addresses the believers again, like most of the other verses, and it gives us 3 do nots. It says, "La yaskhar," "La tanabazu," and "La talmizu." Right, so it's 3 terms that are used. And the first one, "La yaskharu qawman min qawmin," let not some laugh against others. And when you look at the term yaskhar, a good example of that is in Surah 11, where the story of Nuh alayhi salam is, he's building the ark, and they laugh at him. So what kind of, it's not like your common joke. It's like mocking the guy. And I think that the meaning of La Yaskhar is about mocking, scoffing, and ridiculing a person. And that's what these verses are talking about. It's not a simple common joke. It's mocking. And if you look at Noah alayhi salam, he was building the ark, and you look at what an idiot, That's yaskhar, right? The second term is la talmizu. If you look at in the second line on page 1406, wala talmizu anfusakum. So the la talmizu is mentioned in other places, and we can look at one, Surah 9 verse 58 quickly, where the similar term is used, 9:58. And I think usually translates it in our section as do not defame or be sarcastic, right? And if you look at page 457, this is about the Prophet ﷺ when he was dealing with the matter of arms, right? And among them are men who slander you, O Nabi, in the matter of the distribution of the arms. If they are given part thereof, they are pleased, but if not, behold, they are indignant. If you look at the Arabic, وَمِنْهُمْ مَيْ يَلْمِزُوكَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. So this yalmizu or talmizu is really, I think the dictionary translates it as finding fault with someone. So finding fault also in some way slandering the person. Like you negating what he's doing, saying is nonsense, right? And I think this is how we understand the instruction not to defame is not to slander a person or to sort of dig and look for holes or weaknesses in the person. And what's interesting is, humazat al-lumaza, the same namiz is used. So he talks of the slander. So I think the 2 points so far in the verse, the one is that we don't mock or ridicule someone. The second is that we don't find faults and slander a person's character. And then the third term is tanabazu. And it's exactly as Yusuf Ali says, no call each other by nicknames. So it says there, وَلَا تَنَابَزُوا بِالْأَلْقَابِ. When I looked at Arabic there, basically it says to call names or to defame. And when it says names, it means a by name, a surname, or a nickname. So so it's discouraging us from using certain terms when we refer to people. But Allah qualifies it very clearly in the next verse. It says, Bi'sal ismul fusuq. So the thing that's being ironed out as a problem among naming people is ismul fusuq. A name that denotes dishonesty or some, a very negative meaning in what you nickname a person. So, for me, it's like you might call him Johnny. Johnny, fine. You can call him small, like a small child, you can call him Smally. When you get bigger, you can't call him Smally, right? But if you call a guy Chorbai, right? That's not attributing, that's Ismul Fusuk, right? Where you were saying crook, and you create nicknames for that kind of a person. So I think these just are around the character of how we use certain words. And you notice there's a lot around speech in the surah. Warns us against that. Then in verse 12, further rules are given, and these are things to avoid. So here it says, "Oh, you believe, avoid suspicion as much as possible, for suspicion in some cases is a sin, and spy not on each other, nor speak ill of each other behind their backs." So there's again three terms that we've been asked to avoid. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اجْتَنِبُوا كَثِيرًا مِنَ الظَّنِّ. So the term zan usually is understood to be opinion. And I think the most appropriate term here is actually speculation. And it says, and it's quite serious, ijtanibu is used for like ijtanibu, alcohol and gambling. It's associated with shirk. So it's a very serious thing that we should avoid doing. And the thing that we should avoid doing is speculation. And if you think about it, and you look at the previous verses we dealt with, speculation can be very harmful because now people's minds start racing off in different directions. We had some incidences that happened recently in Ramadan, and what happened to this person? Now about 200 stories appear, right? And just speculation upon speculation, and it says in some cases it's a sin. So there is sometimes where there is some sedition going on, and you need to speculate and say what is going on. But we should be very cautious about speculation, and it can drive people in the wrong direction. It could harm people's personalities and character, etc. So that's the first command we're given, to avoid speculation as best as possible. The second is la tajassasu, and that basically is spying. So it says, and spy not on each other. And I think there's other verses that deal with secret councils, right? And there is some justification for an intelligence service in this Muslim Ummah. But in terms of general spying, now basically what the verse is telling you is, for the common man, don't put your nose where it doesn't belong, fundamentally. So these are character things that, if it's not your business, stay out of it. Don't start spying and investigating other people's. You should deal with your own issues. And then the last one is, where are we now? وَلَا يَخْتَبْ بَعْدُكُمْ بَعْضًا. Do not speak ill of each other behind their backs. And that's basically literal as what Yusuf Ali has put there. So this year, I think what they say is speaking evil of someone, even if it's the truth in their absence. So in simple words, gossip. So if I look at this verse, it's telling us, number one, avoid speculation. Don't put your noses where it doesn't belong. And thirdly, don't get involved in gossip, right? And then at the end of this verse, it says, would any of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? Nay, you would abhor it, but fear Allah, for Allah is oft returning most merciful. And I think that's specifically related to gossip, right? Because there's often, you're eating away a person's character by making stories behind their back. And the example here, dead brother, you just think about cadaver, right? Cadaver, not a cadaver, a dead body. Just imagine eating it. It's like, a boy, you can't imagine. You don't even want to take your normal food close to that thing. Forget eating that. And it's such a heinous crime as such. Right, let's move on. Verse 13, I think we've covered many times before, but fundamentally what this verse highlights, we created you from a single pair of male and female and made you into nations and tribes, that you may know each other, not that you may despise each other. And the most honored is those who have the best taqwa. And basically this sort of is a death blow to any tribalism. And even in the Arab world, sometimes you see different clans. It's quite shocking, and there's no basis for such differentiation. Whether you come from certain villages, there's no basis. The basis for righteousness is those who have the best taqwa as such. Right, so we're almost done. Verse 14 and 15 now comes to a different aspect on social behavior and brings us back to the topic of obedience. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it's like fundamentally we should not put ourselves before Allah and His Rasul. We need to be behind Allah and His Rasul, not instructing. Like, and if you just think of that example, is like who's telling who? Allah and His Rasul must tell you, or you telling Allah and His Rasul. We'll come to see that just now. So verse 14 says, قَالَتِ الْأَعْرَابُ آمَنَّا. The desert Arabs say, we believe. Say you have no faith, but you only say we have submitted our wills to Allah, for not yet has faith entered your heart. But if you obey Allah and His Rasul, He will not belittle aught of your deeds, for Allah is forgiving, most merciful. Only those are believers who have believed in Allah and His Rasul, and have never since doubted, but striven with their belongings and their persons in the cause of Allah, such as the sincere ones. So if you just look at these two verses, we've had many discussions around this. What is a mu'min and a Muslim, and is there a difference or not? And there's verses that really praise the Muslim, there's verses that really praise the believer. But here, if you look at the description in 14 and just look at it straight off, there does seem to be a joining of the two. And in this specific example, it says, the Arab says, Amanna, we are believers. Qalu la tu'minu, you have not. And I think the word belief is sometimes not a very effective term. I think commitment is probably a more appropriate way of saying it. So if you think of it, when I look at verse 14 and 15, to me is that belief and being titled, we have submitted our wills, we are Muslim, fundamentally refer to one car, right? So you have a car and you have petrol that drives the car. And my understanding that's been given in 14 and 15 is that this commitment that you have drives the car. You could be sitting in the car and going nowhere. But if you have this, and when we say belief, it's sort of like, I believe in Allah and the Rasul, but this belief, and if you look at it in verse 15, we'll come to it now, this belief actually means that you take what you hold as true to be serious, and you active in that pursuit. And that is what the belief being referred to in 14 and 15. So if you just read through it now, say you have no faith, but we have only submitted our wills to Allah, for not yet has faith entered your heart. But it says, but if you obey Allah and His Rasul, so if your belief is driving you to obey Allah and His Rasul, which is the driving force, He will not belittle aught of your deeds. In verse 15, only those are believers who have believed in Allah and His Rasul, and have never since doubted, but have striven with their belongings and their person. So if you look at the concept of belief in 14 and 15, we always think of belief as a spiritual thing and Muslim as being a submissive thing. But here it's saying that Muslim, you might be in a name, I am Nazir or I am Ghulam or whatever it is. But that's a name. You call yourself Muslim, but you have not engaged sufficiently to strive with and you haven't shown that commitment. And I think that's what 14 and 15 highlight. Then to come to the end now, say, what will you instruct Allah about your religion? But Allah knows all that is in the heavens and in the earth, and He has full knowledge of all things. So this is a major rebuke. قُلْ أَتُعَلِّمُونَ اللَّهَ بِدِينِكُمْ. So it's quite a shocking statement, and it applies to these Arabs, it applies to us, and even applies to our religious scholars, and relates back to verse 1 of the Surah. أَتُعَلِّمُونَ اللَّهَ بِدِينِكُمْ. Are you going to tell Allah, are you going to teach Allah about His deen? That's basically the question is being asked. Who's telling who about what? So it's Allah's deen, and nobody has an authority to override what Allah is saying about His deen, right? Allah knows all that is in the heavens and the earth, and He has full knowledge of all things. So this is a very stark warning that when we look at Allah's verses, that we must understand that we are taking instruction from Allah who knows His deen, rather than taking instruction from anyone other than Allah. They're not on the same level. And then verse 17, brings home a very basic principle that we should always bear in mind, referring to the desert Arabs in the previous verses. They impress on you as a favor that they have embraced Islam. Say, count not your Islam as a favor upon me. Nay, Allah has conferred a favor upon you, that He has guided you to the faith, if you be true and sincere. Verily Allah knows the secrets of the heavens and the earth, and Allah sees well all that you do. So the last thing I'd just like to highlight is that I don't think we truly reflect too much upon the favor we have as being Muslim. And being Muslim means many different things. But I think if you just look at the gift that we're born Muslim, right? And when non-Muslims come in, they really appreciate the value that they get. But a simple thing like, we just finished the fasting month. It's amazing that you can actually exercise such discipline on a global scale. But if you look at try and fast outside of Ramadan, or even if you look at other religions that do fasting, they'll fast from chocolate and they can't even handle it for a day, right? You find our 6, 7, 8-year-olds fasting, If you just look at the impact of alcohol that we're forbidden to consume, the benefits we have, not even talking of the closeness and the purity of the faith, etc. So there's a lot that we need to, when we pray our salah, when we pray to Allah, whatever we do, we should always be grateful for that favor that we have, and also appreciate that with this favor comes the responsibility of putting ourselves behind Allah and His Rasul, not in front of Allah and His Rasul. As a priority. Jazakallah khair.